We're going to talk about the will to win, Britain's entrepreneurial culture and the world's culture. We had a wonderful quote that Sarah Wood expressed in Growth Britannia when she said we should spend more time lionising the amazing startups that exist here and less time navel-gazing about what we don't do well. And that's potentially a very serious question in terms of introducing the theme of this session in terms of the environment for entrepreneurs to thrive in this country. Do we have enough belief in our own potential? Quite often when you talk about being the fastest growing economy in the G7, people tend to sort of laugh or snort. Do our entrepreneurs reach far enough for global markets and opportunities? I mean, how globalized is this sort of entrepreneurial surge? And in many respects, we couldn't have a better panel to address this question because a number of them have created their own world beaters and have come to this country and made it their home. And it's a really great sort of perspective, I think, in terms of actually looking at the UK and its business culture. And the question for them is, does Britain have the will to win? So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome the panel onto stage. I'll introduce them as they come up, but could you show a really warm welcome? Thank you very much indeed. Lord Bilimoria is one of Britain's best-known entrepreneurs. He founded the iconic drinks brand Cobra Beer in 1989. He exports all around the world. He's gone from king of the curry house to king of world beer. Management Today described him as the undisputed king of the curry house. This week, he was announced as the new Chancellor of Birmingham University. Your predecessors include Anthony Eden and other sort of luminaries, so congratulations on that role. Sherry Coutu, CBE, is a serial investor and leading enterprise advisor. According to Wired magazine, few angel investors are so closely linked to so many high-profile projects. She has superb experience, not only of making London her home, but I think of North American enterprise in her role as an advisor to LinkedIn. But she's also recently become a board member at London Stock Exchange. She also serves on the board of Raspberry Pi and has backed an array of explosive growth winners from Due Deal to Y-Plan, Peer Index and Love Film. Some pretty good winners there, Sherry. Philippe Legrain was until recently the economic advisor to the European Union President Jose Manuel Barroso. He's just launched an excellent new book called European Spring, which is published recently. George Soros has described him as an original and insightful thinker. This is an economist that knows how to express a few punchy views. We shall see that very shortly, giving us the European Union perspective. And Frank Meeham. Frank is SparkLabs Global Board Director and a former investor with Horizon Ventures, described as one of the savvy networks behind Summerly. He's got, he does the homework for Nick Delosio, I guess, in terms of building that business. He's been listed in both Wired's UK Top 100 in 2012 and as one of Vanity Fair's The New Establishment. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your panel. Please do give them the very warmest of welcomes. Perhaps I can start with you, Lord Bilimoria. What does a winning entrepreneurial culture look like, do you think? And do we have it here in Britain?
I think we underestimate the entrepreneurial culture that we actually have over here. And I think we underestimate ourselves as a country continually. We keep looking to the States and saying, oh, in the States, this is what they do, and this is how fantastic things are. And I would say that 30 years ago, this country did not have an entrepreneurial culture. I think that it was really the sick man of Europe.
Remind us, what was it like 30 years ago?
I came from India as a student, and it was a closed shop. I mean, I qualified as a chartered accountant here at Ernst & Young, and there was one Indian who was a partner. Right. They said he was a partner because his wife was English. I mean, now, if you just look at the landscape in London since Britain has opened up, since entrepreneurship has been encouraged, we are the most multicultural, cosmopolitan, global, vibrant city in the world.
Yeah.
And it's fantastic. And entrepreneurship is encouraged. I mean, entrepreneurship 30 years ago was Del Boy and second-hand car sales.
Right, okay. And what's changed? I mean, and as part of that, presumably, it's this can-do culture, is it? I mean, it's the fact that, you know, that there's unbridled optimism.
I think a lot of it is down to when you can create an environment of aspiration. And that's got to come government-led. When otherwise, I remember 30 years ago, if you hadn't gone to the right school, if you hadn't gone to Oxford or Cambridge, you wouldn't necessarily get to the top. Now, anyone can get to the top. And I think that's brilliant across this country. And that's changed.
So, Sherry, I mean, you've become a Londoner. You've sort of, and actually love London in terms of actually how it's unleashed your own potential we were talking about in the break. I mean, give us a sense of the London culture, and do you think it's sort of, is it different from the rest of the UK? I mean, what's your sort of impressions of the actual entrepreneurial culture here in Britain?
Yeah. So I'm a Canadian, and I came over here 30 years ago to go to the London School of Economics. So again, another import to go to one of our very fine universities. But I grew up in a lumber town in Canada, and neither of my parents went to university. And what made me an entrepreneur was finding myself here in London with people from all over the world who wanted to create a better world. And the way, it became clear to me shortly after arriving that the best way to create a better world is by starting your own business. And it was London that enabled me to see that. How does London compare to, I live in Cambridge or anywhere else around the country? You know that I started up something called Founders for Schools, which puts British founders of British companies into their local neighborhood schools to talk about the businesses that they've created and why they feel really optimistic about the future, and really connecting the path between high school and what they might do afterwards. And these are electric. Kids up and down the country cannot hear enough. They surround the founders and they just think about, how can I make the glass half full? Often it's the first time they might have ever met somebody who started up their own business, and suddenly they think, oh, well, I don't have to necessarily be a lawyer or a doctor. I could start up my own company. I could start up a beer company. Right. I could start up, a coding company. And suddenly they meet the people, and they're all around us, and they know that they can do that. And it's a fabulous space. I don't think it's just London. I'm a huge fan of London, but I do think that the capacity...
Its tentacles are out all over the country.
All over the country.
So Philippe, I mean, you're sat listening attentively, and obviously, you've approached this from a kind of European Union perspective, historically. It's not always the most popular of institutions with entrepreneurs, but in your book, one of the great saviours potentially of Europe that you outline are its entrepreneurs. How's that going to work?
Well, I think clearly London is a dynamic global city, and the fact that talented people from all over the country and all over the world come here is a huge strength. At the same time, Britain is not doing as well as it could do. It ranks 28th in the world according to the World Bank in terms of the ease of starting a business. According to the Global Enterprise Monitor, it's behind Estonia, which is the birthplace of Skype and other internet startups. I think one question we need to ask ourselves here is, there are many, many talented entrepreneurs in this country, no doubt many of them here, and yet why don't we have companies of the scale of a Google or an Amazon here? And it's very striking that none of our internet startups have reached that scale, and so something is missing.
And is that something about culture, or is it about structure, do you think?
I think it's partly about finance. It's partly because we haven't completed the single market in digital services, which ought to be a priority. And I think at some point there is something about a lack of ambition, as in terms of, it's one thing to start a company, but very often it's sold rather than pursuing it to its full potential.
Right, now Frank, you've come, it's from Australia, isn't it, in terms of, I'm half Australian, so I've found some of the antipathy and interest. Is it different here? Does the weather make Australia a more sunny and entrepreneurial place, or have you found your blue skies here in Britain?
Yeah, mate, we just chilled out, It's the only thing you do in Australia is open up a restaurant or a beach shack, It's but
that's
Nick,
entrepreneurial, isn't it?
Absolutely, so Nick, Nick Delosio from Sunley, as you know, as I was, we shepherded him from the start. But Nick is Australian from the start, So at the age of 7, he persuaded his parents to come to the UK to start his company.
Right, and that's pretty entrepreneurial. And what have you found now you've moved over? Give us a sense of that.
So, look, I've been out for a long time actually, but I've been in San Francisco for a while and just came back, and I came back because it's absolutely buzzing here, and I actually tend to disagree with you at how, in fact, I really disagree with you at how I think it's
dust-ups are obligatory, just
well,
not fists.
That's that sort of thing, So, but I think it's actually really good here now. I think it's, I invest all over the world. I have a global fund. So I do see the different conditions for things around the world, and this is actually now one of the best.
But is that just the sort of the square mile that's around here, or do you see that as being a wider UK issue?
SCIS it was a really, really big step, and a lot of other countries are looking at that. But that has opened up a lot of investment and into certain things here. But you also see stuff like Entrepreneur First and Matt Clifford's stuff where he's just getting the grads, because the universities in the US are much better at channeling grads into companies, and so Entrepreneur First starts and boom, and off it goes. And I've done the Founders for School thing, and and Sherry's right. You do get surrounded by the kids now. They're absolutely manage. So I think it's just it's a generational thing, but I do think the generation coming through is vastly different
Right.
to the previous.
Now, Lord Bilimoria, you've accompanied 3 prime ministers on trade visits to India. You'll tell us whether they resigned straight afterwards or whether they still stayed on. But the 3, it's a great sort of record to see 3 different styles of leadership. But I think 2 questions really, a 2-parter. The first is, how internationally minded do you think the British enterprise culture is? And do you think that, is government doing enough to potentially sort of stimulate that?
Well, it's a great day to talk about India because the Indian election results are coming out as we speak, and the BJP and Narendra Modi have swept into power. Literally, it's the first time in 30 years that one party and has got an outright majority without a coalition.
Is that good news for Indian entrepreneurs?
Very good news because they're very pro-business.
Right.
Every business person I've spoken to is very happy about that news. And it's great news for Britain. And the thing that frustrates me at this end is I think we've got this entrepreneurial culture. I think governments, all 3, by the way, encouraged Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, David Cameron. They've all been encouraging enterprise and entrepreneurship. They're trying to create the environment. Not everything is perfect. I think our taxes are still far too high. I think there's still too much bureaucracy, particularly from the European Union coming in. But on the whole, we've got it pretty good, and our universities are encouraging it as well. What we lack is a confidence.
Right.
And what we lack is a global outlook. We don't appreciate enough how good this country is in every aspect.
Is that strange given the history of Britain? I mean, shouldn't a global outlook be almost sort of hardwired into the DNA of a country like Britain?
Yeah, but it went through from having the biggest empire the world has ever known, dipping down into almost a sort of, well, we're no longer, and a very negative outlook. And we're still number 6 economy in the world. We have the best capabilities in everything from law, accounting, manufacturing, design, beer, you name it, we have. But we're not confident enough about it. And that's why things like this Great Britain campaign that's going out there is fantastic news. And our entrepreneurs need to look globally. They need to engage with India much more. If I talk, how many of you here do business with India? Look at that. 1.25 billion people, somebody who's selling tea on a platform, railway platform in India has become Prime Minister of India today. That's the aspiration environment in India.
Well, maybe Sherry, pick up on that. I mean, how do we get, if we wanted to say a sign of success would be next year, there'd be a lot more hands up for a question like that. I mean, do we need a more international cosmopolitan approach, or are we too inward looking, do you think? Or does it matter?
I think that we probably are too inward looking, but that's fantastic. As a glass half full person, that's fantastic because that's a solvable problem. And I think one of our opportunities is we can deal in India and in Silicon Valley or Vancouver and in Singapore all in the same day, and we're actually globally extremely well placed for that. And all of the businesses that I've invested in or started have been global in nature, and I think that the UK is the number 1 best spot for that. I just wanted to pick up on whether or not you start up a company or whether or not you support their growth to scale up, because I think that some of the policies historically have been focused on the starting them up, and I think that we really need to see a focus on scaling them up and supporting that.
And what would you say needs to happen to achieve that in terms of the scale up ambition? I mean, is that just a question of more guts from the entrepreneurs, or are there special triggers here?
You mentioned culture. I don't think it's more guts from the entrepreneur. I think it is partially structural. So I think focusing policies on the employment. The number 1 problem that these scale-ups say that they have is getting talent. Okay, well, how do we do the talent? We should probably have programs at primary school and secondary and university. And if we can't yet manufacture all of the students for our businesses that are growing here, then we should make it possible to import them more easily, with probably a greater number, perhaps, of the visas than have already been
looking
allocated.
at this in a European standpoint, is Britain and Europe up for this sort of challenge? Or has the tide slightly gone out and gone maybe to the east in terms of that kind of entrepreneurial interest? What's your view about what you're seeing?
Clearly, there are massive growth opportunities, not just in Asia, but throughout the world. I think what we need to do is we need to celebrate the success that exists, but not be complacent and tell ourselves we're the best in the world, but also try to learn from what others do better. If you look, for example, in terms of digital skills, Estonia is starting to teach kids digital skills at the age of 7. the age of 7. So by the time that you've graduated age 18, you haven't learnt one set of skills, you've learnt how technology is developed, you've learnt how to learn. That's a huge advantage. Or if you look in terms of access to finance, there is 10 times more venture capital in Israel than there is here in Britain. There's 5 times more in the US. As a share of GDP. So yes, celebrate what we do well, but don't tell ourselves that we're the best in the world. Actually, we need to learn from what the rest of the world does better.
Frank, give us a sense. I mean, first of all, you feel free to disagree
No,
with Philippe,
totally
but I mean that's. But similarly, what if you were to sort of try and dissect the British entrepreneurial culture, kind of as you've now experienced it? I mean, obviously you've warmed to it, but immigration is presumably a great sort of sign of a country doing well in terms of people actually wanting to come here. Why do people want to come to Britain to build businesses? And are they coming? And how could we make them come in more numbers?
Yeah, I mean that's a real big one, isn't it? So I think they are coming now because they actually can see that investors. Because again, coming back to SEIS and stuff like that, I mean, early angel investors are really coming into here, and because of that, and so companies are coming here to take advantage of that. That is definitely happening, and I think that's. But it's a scaling issue again, right? So I led when I was at Horizons, we led our investment in DeepMind, right? And of course, DeepMind, $400 million company, under the radar, sold to Google, but when it was sold, it was only Asian, Hong Kong and US money, right? Yeah. So I think that's the biggest issue, is that most of the investors here don't want to take those long-term bets, and actually what's going to happen, they're going to get pinched out by some of the others. So there's a lot of Chinese money now flowing into Europe and starting to come into here because they can see the valuations here are better, talent's good. It's all about the value.
And how do we get a bigger slice of the pie? How do we get a bigger slice of the action of that sort of money?
I would encourage that. I would seriously encourage Chinese investors, Asian investors to come in here and start putting the money in, because it will shake up the investors here.
Just because we're starting to run very low on time, but just on this idea about getting more of the world's talented through the door at Heathrow or whatever other airport we're going to have, maybe Stansted, whatever it's going to be. just this sort of sense of, do we need to be a more open environment to bringing the world's talented here? I mean, you've actually been on public record, Karen. On
well, I think one thing the government has not done well is the messages it's sent out on immigration. I mean, having an immigration cap, including student figures, international student figures within the immigration figures, is ridiculous. It's sending out all the negative, wrong messages. On the other hand, the government has programs like Sirius. We're attracting young entrepreneurs, graduate entrepreneurs to come and set up their businesses here and have a competition. So doing the right thing. But I do agree that we could do more. And innovation and R&D, we invest as a country far, far less as a percentage of GDP than the OECD average, EU average, let alone the United States, even less than South Korea.
Right.
Higher education, we invest less as a percentage of GDP than many, many other countries. We need to invest more in those areas.
Okay, so last 2 words to Philippe and to Sherry. If we were going to supercharge that culture, what's one thing, if you had a magic